morning, and welcome to Morning Movie News, where over the holiday weekend, something extraordinary happened. Hollywood apologized. Yes, Lionsgate could no longer ignore the fury from audiences worldwide that Gods of Egypt is so whitewashed. And they did something that Fox and Ridley Scott did not do with Exodus, and that is that they issued an apology publicly. Not only Lionsgate, but also director Alex Proyas. And they both said, we've let you down. We really, Alex Proyas said, I should have been more open-minded and authentic to the time period when casting. But Lionsgate in particular went the extra mile, and they said, we have a history of being, really responsible with the movies that we make, and we didn't do that here, and we should have. And so, our bad. Now, the question becomes, will this save the movie? Like, what do you do now? The movie's already been made. I mean, it's maybe not completed in post, but it's to the point where they can release a special effects or visual effects filled trailer, right? So what are they going to do? Are they just going to shelve it? Or are they hoping that by apologizing and saying, never again, this time, the time that we've already had it happen, you'll still go and see the movie? Because this is obviously a big investment for Lionsgate. It's something they're hoping to become a franchise, because Hunger Games, while they want to bring it back, it's still a little bit of ways from that happening, I think, and that franchise is also eroded in its box office. But what else do they have? They have the Allegiant, the Divergent movies, now Insurgent, and then of course they have the Now You See Me brand, what they're trying to build into a brand. So Gods of Egypt, you can just tell from the trailer, that's a big investment for them and something they had high hopes for. But it's interesting because Exodus, this was just a cloud that hung over the film throughout its entire, ad campaign and leading up to its release. And then it just died and went away. But Christian Bale, Joel Edgerton, constantly hounded with this type of question about how do you feel about not only being in a whitewashed movie, but being the whitewashed actor. So it makes you wonder the process is going to be like for Gerard Butler, the actor from Game of Thrones, though, Jamie Lannister. I'm sure he's just be happy to be getting asked any questions at all. He's like, although it's kind of sad for him that this was supposed to be a big break, the lead in a big movie, and the Game of Thrones curse seems to be alive and well. Let's hope that Gwendolyn Christie doesn't bring it to Star Wars: The Force Awakens. But every actor who's tried to move beyond the Game of Thrones television show into the big screen has had horrible results. So I'll be curious to see how this works out. And also, poor Chadwick Boseman, this is supposed to be the 2016 is supposed to be the year of Black Panther. He's making his silver screen debut in Civil War. Everyone very excited for him in the trailer when that came out Tuesday, the day before Thanksgiving weekend. But now he's stuck in the middle of this as well, and is the only, somewhat ethnically correct, individual in the movie. So he's going to get a lot of questions about that, and I'm sure that's not what he wants to be talking about. So the other thing that I wanted to touch on with this story was that Ava DuVernay, I think Deadline follows her Twitter feed really closely. I don't know if that was her publicist's idea or what, but it's a bad idea because it creates this situation where Ava DuVernay, is really only mentioned in her commentary on race in Hollywood, right? Now that's of course a very important subject matter, and obviously one that's important not only to Ava DuVernay but to everyone. And I think because of her own, her being an African American director, having some success in Hollywood, having directed Selma, she is a good person to speak on it. But I think she's verging on morphing from talent to someone who is a commentator and an activist, and that's really not what she came to Hollywood to do, and it's not why everybody fell in love with her as a director behind the camera. So I think Ava DuVernay should focus more on directing a movie and a follow-up to Selma. Then she had some projects apparently in the works, and she turned down Black Panther, of course, but nothing's really come to fruition. And I think she should spend more time on her actual career than tweeting. Although maybe that's her new career. But I'm curious, what do you think of how Ava DuVernay has developed as a talent? I guess that's the first thing I want to ask you. Post Selma, when considering what high hopes everybody had for her. And then also, what do you think of this Gods of Egypt apology? Is it enough for you? Are you like, yeah, you know what? I accept your apology, Lionsgate and Alex Proyas. I will see your movie, even though it's horribly whitewashed. Because, whitewashed movies about, ancient Egypt in particular and ancient times have done very well over the years. It's like something that Hollywood has done quite a bit. And I think one of the reasons that they were still trying to do it, because they were like, you guys like this for decades. Now you have a problem with it? It's like, yeah, I think because you have such a global movie-going audience right now, and you have so many more different demographics, not only going to the movies, but, being polled, right? Being an obvious, they have purchase power. So I think that that's why you can't do it anymore. But I'm curious, will you forgive them and go see Gods of Egypt, or are you taking this movie down? All right, so that's the first story of the day. And the second story of the day has to do with Jennifer Lawrence, who made a lot of headlines. Well, she always makes headlines no matter what she does. But she made a real headline, really surprising a lot of people when she said she wants to direct while doing press for Mockingjay Part 2. Maybe she's trying to distract people from its depreciating box office, and she's like, I'm going to direct. So she's not only writing a screenplay with Amy Schumer, but now she wants to direct a movie as well. And we'll talk about the movie that she wants to direct in just a moment, but it's a very interesting situation. She is one of the latest young name talent individuals to step behind the camera. Other recent ones are James Franco and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. They haven't really had any success doing it. We'll see if Jennifer Lawrence can, but it's unusual. Usually actors step behind the camera later in their careers, or they become producers later in their careers. But Jennifer Lawrence's career seems to be, sped up on fast forward. She's already got her Oscar, now she wants to direct. And I think that's a good idea. I think that, while she's not producing, right, I think it would be hard to direct a movie and not also be a producer on it, especially in today's movie-making environment. But, Brad Pitt, Leonardo DiCaprio, we talk about this all the time, that they both moved to producing to diversify their portfolios, and it's been very effective for them, both from a financial standpoint and also for Brad Pitt from an Oscar standpoint. I mean, he won an Oscar for producing, not acting. So I'm all for Jennifer Lawrence diversifying her own portfolio. I think it's a very smart thing to do. So kudos to her for deciding to do it. And, but also maybe because she feels her career's on fast forward, she's going to burn out audiences faster than an actor typically would. So that's also very smart if that's what she's doing. And she might even be doing it not totally for that reason, but that's part of it. That might be something that she and her team are factoring in. Like, you know what? I'm a little overexposed. There might be a Jennifer Lawrence backlash coming. Let's put me behind the camera so that I can escape there for a little bit if necessary. Now, this is interesting because it mimics someone else who was a real box office draw, at least for a little while, and that just shows you how cyclical Hollywood can be. Although she hasn't come back around, and I'm talking about Angelina Jolie. She's really not a box office draw these days, and she's moved to directing, of course. And I'm sure maybe she doesn't appreciate Jennifer Lawrence moving in there because Angelina Jolie's had a nice little spot carved out for herself, but, as talent turned director, a woman. But Elizabeth Banks is also kind of challenging her as well, but, Elizabeth Banks isn't at the level of Angelina Jolie or Jennifer Lawrence. Now, Angelina Jolie started out pretty well in The Land of Blood and Honey, got some attention, and then Unbroken got a lot of attention, but really no nominations. And then her latest film, By the Sea, was practically laughed off the screen, but she deserved it because that was really a vanity project for her and Brad Pitt. But anyway, like Angelina Jolie's earlier efforts, Jennifer Lawrence will not, or she says she won't star in this movie. And Jennifer Lawrence starring in a movie does not guarantee box office. I think that's something that some of you have brought up as well, but that's something that I think everybody needs to remember, that Jennifer Lawrence is not a guaranteed box office draw at this point. Now, of course, she might only be a draw in blockbusters and not in smaller films. That's totally valid. So we'll see how her career develops, but she still very much, was benefited from being not part of one but two major franchises, Hunger Games and the X-Men movies. But anyway, so she's not, for now, the time being, she's not going to star in this film. So what is it? It's called Project Delirium, and she would direct a movie about the military experiments in the 1960s to try and, do mental warfare, and it's where they took soldiers and just, individuals, I don't know if they were all soldiers, but they experimented on them, and they gave them LSD, nerve agents, to see what they could do, and if they could incapacitate soldiers from a mental standpoint. They, of course, did tremendous damage to the individuals they were testing, and it's kind of like a really shadowy part of the military's history. Now, that's not its first time on the silver screen. George Clooney made a movie about this called The Men Who Stare at Goats. That movie, it's very memorable to me for one good line, bit of advice where it says, if you find yourself swimming upstream, it's because you're in the wrong stream, and when you find the right path in life, everything will start to just flow a lot better. And I was like, wow, that's great advice. Too bad I had to sit through this crappy movie to get it, because it's not a good movie. So maybe but also there was really no interest in the subject matter. So I think that Jennifer Lawrence has a little bit of an uphill battle with what she's chosen. But George Clooney also is a good example of an actor who went to the directing side with pretty good results, at least initially. It's hard. Building a career in Hollywood is very hard to do. But I think so far so good for Jennifer Lawrence. I think it's smart, and I'd be curious to see how it turns out. Advice to her, I think bottom line, make it cheap. Make it a very inexpensive movie, and that will really increase the chances of it being a success, especially from a financial standpoint, so she doesn't have to be embarrassed for losing anybody any money. So when I say cheap, I'm thinking like 15 million or under 10 if she can do it, because she's really the star, and so she doesn't have to spend a lot of money on the movie itself. She just has to do a good job directing it. Easier said than done. All right, so that's the second story of the day, and I'm curious to how many of you are interested in Jennifer Lawrence as a director, and what do you think of it as a career move? Now, the third story of the day is I thought it would be fun to talk about the latest developments in the awards race, because we're actually starting to see a little bit of movement and some surprising movement, so it's worth discussing. Now, as you'll hear me say a lot over the next coming weeks, because I'll be covering a lot of awards contenders, the awards race is wide open. There's really no frontrunner, which is very exciting for our pal Leo, and we'll be talking about him in a moment, but also Mad Max Fury Road. I think this really opens up the possibilities that it'll get nominations. I don't know if it even deserves wins. We have to see how the rest of the nominations shake out, but it deserves to be in there as a nominated film. I feel for picture and director, and we're really going to focus more on actors. That's why I bring that up. But I wanted to discuss Mad Max initially because I think it has a very, very, very good chance because the Oscar race is so wide open. But let's talk about the actors as promised. Now, DiCaprio has gotten a lot of headlines over the last few days for getting a lot of attention for his turn in The Revenant, because the reviews are starting to come out, because you might be wondering, why is The Revenant screening so early? Well, if you want to go in some of the earlier awards races like New York Critics Association, etc., basically the critic awards across the country. And those are important because they start to give you momentum towards the bigger races. So if you want to be considered for that, you have to screen your movie now. That's one of the reasons Star Wars The Force Awakens will not be considered for those early awards, because it's not willing to screen for them, which I think is a whole other discussion, which is very interesting. But The Revenant is screening, and people are saying this might actually be Leonardo DiCaprio's year to win the Oscar. And especially when you see how the rest of the race is shaping up, because this is who people are mentioning, and I think it's a very weak category, Best Actor, which is weird, because it's always so strong, which is why DiCaprio has not won yet, but this might be the one year where there aren't any strong entries, and he's able to take it. Now, of course, Eddie Redmayne is a very strong frontrunner, but he just won, so that might help DiCaprio. But he's very good in The Danish Girl, but The Danish Girl is losing a lot of its luster. People aren't as excited about it anymore, as you can see later today on Movie Math with its box office debut. So maybe he's not the sure thing that was once thought. Then Johnny Depp in Black Mass, that movie also not particularly well received overall. And then also Will Smith for Concussion, and I think that he might get a nomination, but he's also really not another. I don't see a lot of strength there. I haven't seen the movie yet, but I don't see it being a particularly sexy contender during award season. So that's shocking that DiCaprio might win, for a combination, of course, of his wonderful performance, but lucking out in a really lackluster year. Now, the other interesting thing that's come about is that Sylvester Stallone is actually getting a lot of buzz for Creed for Best Supporting Actor. And I think that's wonderfully exciting, and I think just a great story. Hollywood loves great stories, so that narrative could really help his Oscar chances. And of course, it's that for the very first Rocky, he was one of the very few actors who've ever been nominated for acting and writing for a picture, as he was, but he didn't win. He didn't win writing or acting. So for him to come back to the property and, kind of be rewarded not only for his work over the years as Rocky, and of course that first film, but also I think for gifting his franchise to new talent, a new generation of talent. Not like George Lucas being like, you can have this and you can pry my cold dead fingers off of it, or I've killed it basically, and you can see if you can revive it. But it was very generous of Sylvester Stallone to give this to Ryan Coogler and let him take the lead when it's something that he's been creatively in charge of for his entire career, literally. So I think that's a great story, and I think Stallone would be hard to beat in the Best Supporting Actor category if they play that up right. Now, the final thing I wanted to talk about is that the Spirit nominations came out. So we have a little bit of an idea of how the independent category is shaping up. And there was a very good development, I think, that many of you would be very happy to hear. Now, Carol had the most nominations, and so that's not a big surprise. Carol, I think, is going to be a very strong awards contender because it's Harvey Weinstein. We'll see if it actually wins anything, though. But the thing that tied with it for the most nominations, this is for independent film, was Beasts of No Nation from Netflix. That is a major win for Netflix. That's incredibly impressive. And Abraham Adda was nominated for Male Lead. I'm surprised you don't see his name being mentioned with the larger awards race. It should be. I think while I had problems with Beasts of No Nation personally as a film, I thought that Abraham Otta was amazing and totally deserves the nomination, if not the win. He could actually be Leonardo DiCaprio's biggest competition, come to think of it. And then Idris Elba was nominated for supporting, so that's great for his career. He needs the attention. So Beast of No Nation, that's very strong. Now, not all the time does it work. Does it translate to the larger awards ceremonies? But still, for this, it reminds me a little bit of Beasts of the Southern Wild. That film also did very well in the indie awards races, the pre-races almost, and then it had a real Oscar presence. It didn't walk home with a lot of gold, but still, Beasts of No Nation, if it can just land a lot of nominations, that would be huge for Netflix. Then also, Anomalisa, the animated film from Charlie Kaufman, got some nominations, and that's very exciting. That could be a big upset for Inside Out if that film really connects. But then, in the Oscar, with the animation, it's the one category in the Oscars where they seem to always go mainstream over like the better received films, which I think is always really funny. But Pixar's hard to beat. Then also Spotlight, of course, got nominations. I think that's a strong contender. It so far has enjoyed a lack of competition, but I think as these other pictures start to come in and maybe people look for better stories, like let's get a Mad Max, let's get DiCaprio, let's get Stallone. It could be a really interesting Maverick year at the Oscars, and I think Spotlight's a little bit too traditional. Then also another movie which is gaining traction is Tangerine, which is another movie about trans women, but it actually stars trans actors, and it was shot all on an iPhone, which I think is also like another great story, another great Oscar story, another great narrative. So expect to see Tangerine also start to get some momentum, especially off of the nominations here. So that's very exciting. All right, so I'm curious to what you think of how the awards race is shaping up as we get closer and closer to the actual awards. December 10th, by the way, is when they're going to announce the Golden Globe nominations, so that's really soon. And of course, the Oscar nominations will be announced on January 14th, so we're really closing in fast. Now let's go to the viewer question from Ryan Colleran. And I liked Ryan's question. I thought it was really good. So Ryan said, "Hi, Grace. I'm a longtime viewer." First, he starts out with a nice inspirational story. And he says, I love the show, your channel. I love the show. Your channel was part of the reason I got inspired to apply to film school here in the UK, which I started in September, and I'm loving so far. Oh, that's such a great story. I always love to hear when anybody's inspired to pursue this business because of this show. It's an exciting business. It's a tough business, but it's a very rewarding one if you can make it. And I think that I hope that, Ryan, I'd be interested to know what you're studying because as I try very hard to point out, there are so many rewarding and different paths in Hollywood to take besides the ones that the media usually highlights. And rewarding in terms of like success and also creative success. So I think that's really great. So Ryan, that's fabulous. And I'm so happy and I'm glad you're enjoying film school so far. Now, Ryan's question is, and I'd be curious to hear everyone's thoughts on this as well. So Ryan asks, in a recent interview with GQ, O'Shea Jackson Jr., that's Ice Cube's son, who made a big splash in Straight Outta Compton, said that he stated that if approached to do a superhero movie, he would prefer to be a villain. So my question is, what DC or Marvel villain do you think Jackson Jr. could play well? And if not a genre film, what do you think he should do next in his acting career? Great question. I think O'Shea Jackson Jr. is definitely a talent to watch. And it was actually listed as many moviegoers who went to see Straight Outta Compton as one of their primary reasons for going. So expect potentially big things from him. He's at least positioned well to be big. Now, what I would like, and then he says, thank you so much and keep up the great work with your channel, Ryan, smiley face. All right, so the first thing that I would say for O'Shea Jackson Jr. is I think that he needs to distance himself from his father. I think his father has done a wonderful job launching his career, but now I think he needs to take on movies that aren't like Ice Cube movies. And by that I mean films where they don't require a lot of acting, right? Ice Cube, I think, is more of a personality than an actor, which is there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people have had wonderful careers being personalities instead of actors, but I think that O'Shea Jackson Jr., I was really impressed with his acting in Straight Outta Compton. So I think he could take the Jackson family's movie career to the next level and become more of a real actor, which I think would be very exciting, would help his children should they decide to go into the acting business. So when it comes to comic book movies, I think that if you're going to go the ethnicity of the character in the comics, there aren't a lot of great characters left, to be honest. But they could always change the ethnicity of a character, as they did, for instance, with Deadshot, and as they're rumored to want to do with Zatanna. So I think that there are choices for O'Shea Jackson Jr. that are pretty good that are still left. Now, he's a little bit difficult to cast because of his size. Like his dad, he's a big guy. He's like, not only, he seems very big and imposing. So you have to pick a role that fits with that. Now, I think he'd be a great Vandal Savage, but unfortunately, that's the lead villain on DC's Legends of Tomorrow, which is very, very hotly anticipated. Now, of course, they're different universes, so you could have two different Vandal Savages, but why do that? They have a problem with the Flash. Let's see how that works out, but I don't see them taking Vandal Savage as a major villain in the movies, considering how important he is to he's the villain of the show for Legends of Tomorrow. But I think O'Shea Jackson Jr. would be a great Vandal Savage. He could potentially play Calabac, Darkseid's son, the one that they switch with Orion at birth. But I think that Calabac obviously is not a role that anyone would want because he looks so monstrous. But I think they could reimagine the role, as they're doing with a lot of comic book characters these days. So I think if reimagined in an exciting way, O'Shea Jackson Jr. would be a good Calabac. I would have mentioned him as Darkseid, but he seems a bit young for that role, which is why I thought of the son. But he could be Darkseid. Then you could always make him the new Electro. They race-bended that role with Jamie Foxx, of course. Didn't work out so well, but I think everybody was excited for that, and it wasn't Jamie Foxx's fault, and it wasn't the design of the character's fault, right? It was really just a very poorly written script. But then also, when I was thinking Spider-Man villains, I think that he would be a pretty good Kraven, because, he has that size, that imposing size, and almost like that big cat-like movements. And so that would obviously also include some race bending, but I think that O'Shea Jackson Jr. would be a great Kraven, so I would like that. And then also, if we're going to go for big cats, speaking of big cats, I think he could maybe play Sabretooth. We've already had, that wrestler played him in the first X-Men movies, and it went to Liev Schreiber. So if they're going to maybe do something with Sabretooth, I don't know if Liev Schreiber is in canon. I guess he is. But especially if Hugh Jackman is leaving, I think you could, redo Sabretooth or have like a Sabretooth-like character take over. I don't think anybody would miss Liev Schreiber, although if you would, be sure to speak up. But I think O'Shea Jackson Jr. would be very good in that as well. And I think that would be, give him someone good to play off of. Now, if he doesn't want to do a villain, whoever plays Wolverine. Now, if he doesn't want to be a villain, I think that the one character that's left, I think that is still really good up for grabs, because don't forget that Static Shock is going to go to digital. I think Jaden Smith is playing that role, at least that was the rumor. But I think Cloak and Dagger is what's left. And he would be a really good Cloak, potentially. I think, get a really great Dagger opposite him. I think that could be a great idea. And I think it would be a great role for O'Shea Jackson Jr. But so it's a hero. So if he doesn't mind being heroic, I think that would be a good way to go. All right. So thank you for your question, Ryan. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. Please be sure to write down what you think of today's top 3 stories in the comments below. And also what you think O'Shea Jackson Jr. should do next, comic book, movie, or not. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you had a wonderful holiday weekend if you're stateside. If not, I hope you just had a nice weekend. And you can check out some other episodes right now.